Great. So at a certain point, we're getting into the Middle Ages here. Who were some of the saints who advanced devotion to Saint Joseph in the Middle
So
Ages?
there's a tremendous jumpstart for Joseph in the Middle Ages, and I would say spearheaded by Bernard of Clairvaux. And
Hmm.
this moment of reform in the church, there's a moment of rather intense reform. It's already beginning before Bernard of Clairvaux. We see this work in Cluny, which is seeing this really transformation, reawakening of the church, its beliefs, its way of life, and then of course the Cistercians. Which Bernard of Clairvaux will probably be its greatest exponent, which again is continuing to encourage the process of reform. And it is Bernard of Clairvaux who preaches on Joseph, husband of Mary, and really brings forth a Joseph who is not a Joseph of the apocryphals, but a Joseph. He draws from the Joseph of Scripture, comparing him to his namesake, Joseph the patriarch, and sort of creates
Hmm.
a very dignified and almost regal Joseph that will begin to allow artists to look at Joseph differently.
Now, Saint Bernard, obviously one of the great Marian saints as well, and I'm curious if in your research you found that. I mean, obviously every Catholic saint is going to be devoted to Mary, but um, did you find that saints that were particularly Marian were likely to have a special devotion to Saint Joseph as well?
I think for the most part, by and large, yes. So Bernardino of Siena, for example, as well. But then there are saints who really not that they are devoted to Mary, but that Joseph really, in the case of Teresa of Avila, Joseph really becomes a beacon for her. So it really kind of
Hmm.
depended, depending on, it depended. In the beginning, we see more of the reflection on Joseph as an offshoot of a reflection on Mary. And then as the centuries progress, Joseph begins to be a standalone devotion.
I see. I see. So, yeah, let's look at this Gisela Bertus flight into Egypt here. Very,
Hmm.
very interesting portrayal. I would have to. It's certainly the first of its kind that you show in the book. I don't know if there's any precedents for it earlier in art history.
I did not find a precedent. I love that. I think if I were to go and search all the Romanesque capitals and all the Romanesque churches in France, I would probably end up finding another one. Looks to me
Mhm.
like something that would have. Um, it looks to me like something that would have had, if you will, a certain iconographic success in that kind of imagery. So what we're talking about, just to be clear, is in the Cathedral of Saint-Lazare in Autun, which is in Burgundy in France. You have a series, that whole area is filled with these exceptionally beautiful churches built in the Romanesque era. So that would be the 11th, 12th century. And this is again the same area, the same exact area as where you have Cluny is in Burgundy, and the Cistercians are formed in the Abbey of Fontenay in Burgundy. So this is the ground zero of the church revival. They start building these churches that have a lot of carving. The Romanesque means that there's a lot of stone in these buildings, and so
Hmm.
there's a lot of stonework, and therefore for decoration they use a lot of carving. And Gilbertus, who works in the Cathedral of Autun, he decorates the capitals of the columns. So all the capitals, all the arches, but most surprisingly, the capitals. If any of your listeners ever took art history, they're thinking, oh, capitals, Ionic, Doric, Corinthian, composite, Tuscan. There's a very simple 5 types of capitals. But in
Right.
Romanesque art, these become spaces. The spaces on the top of the columns become places where they try to show narratives. And this incredibly beautiful, wonderful piece of sculpture has Mary holding Jesus sitting on a donkey, and then Joseph is leading the donkey around the corner of the Capitol, and he's wearing a little knight's outfit. He's dressed up
Yeah.
as a knight. It was, of course, the moment I was like, oh, I know what I'm going to call the book. So he's dressed up as this knight, and he's holding his sword, and you see him as this wonderful reflection of a world of, you have the abbots, you have the knights, and this is the society, right? So you have this group of people who will be joining religious orders, and the men who become abbots are usually scions of incredibly important families, whereas the oldest scion becomes a knight, is meant to bring honor to the family by caring for the family and bringing on the family dynasty. And so these two, this kind of this world, which is a feudal world, as much as we may not approve of a feudal world, it is what it is. This feudal world begins to contemplate Saint Joseph as a nobleman. They start talking about his genealogy, that he's descended from kings. Joseph is a regal man, says Bernard of Clairvaux. He is like Joseph the patriarch. He is accustomed to the company of kings. He's of a line of kings, and Joseph is accustomed to the company of kings. And the two of them also share this powerful form of communication through contemplation. So where Joseph the patriarch is given the capacity of interpreting dreams, Joseph, the foster father of Christ, has an even greater ability of understanding through dreams. How does he interpret divine will? Because he's given a privileged form of communication. Now, for men like Bernard of Clairvaux, who are famous for these beautiful visions, Joseph is the antecedent of this. Joseph is the antecedent of the contemplative life, where you have this privileged way of communicating with the Lord. So the beautiful way that this gets explored in the art and the spirituality of the age.
And here we start getting into a younger and more virile Joseph as well, right?
They're more comfortable. So of course, Bernard of Clairvaux talks about the regality. He talks about this as a contemplative, this communication through this angelic communication. And the third thing he talks about is self-mastery. And so the Joseph of Bernard of Clairvaux, like Joseph the patriarch, he refuses, he rejects, he advances Potiphar's wife, and Joseph, the foster father of Christ, lives chastely with Mary because he chooses to, not because he's so old he can't do anything else, but because he is a man of self-mastery. And that is a turning point at the new millennium, which allows us to start thinking of Joseph in a million different ways. And that's really the art begins to accumulate very rapid fire from this moment on.
Yeah. So, and this makes him into a figure who's more, even more analogous to Mary in his choice as a young man to undertake this duty.
Exactly. This is a man who chooses, and they begin, and also, and you'll see later on, they begin to converge in their mission. They begin to you see them much more as a kind of a complementary pair, a husband and wife, who are working together in this project of salvation.
You were just talking about sleeping Saint Joseph, so you'll Saint Joseph dreams. Let's take a quick look at a couple of these. I wanted to look at the first at the Chartres Cathedral stained glass panel, which is really beautiful in its colors.
It is. It's a stunningly beautiful panel. The famous blue of Chartres, that's sort of the great recipe for that deep blue, and in it we see that. So the icon we were talking about before in Sinai, we saw Joseph kind of relegated over to the lower left hand side, kind of left in the corner. In Chartres, we begin to see Joseph now paired with Mary. So even the sense of the complementarity between their roles, Joseph is sleeping, Mary is awake, but you have them both converging towards the Christ child who's in the crib in his swaddling clothes. And interestingly, a little bit of both of their colors seems to be intermixed into the where the Christ child is. So it seems to me that
Right.
they're working towards this idea of what you were just saying before about Mary and Joseph having these kinds of complementary similarities.
Speaking of contemplation, there's also this Fra Angelico diptych that portrays Saint Joseph in a contemplative role.
Those are works that I think beautiful. It's a little Predella piece, and he does a ton of them. By the way, I was just looking at another one in the Vatican
Yeah, I've seen a
Museums
number of
yesterday
them.
morning, second guessing myself. Should I use this one? Should I use that one? But what again? It's again this question of the pairing of Mary and Jesus. It becomes a greater sense of uh, bringing Joseph now closer and closer and more participatory in the witness, as more participatory as witness to the incarnation. And in the case of Fra Angelico, who is Dominican, i.e., the order of preachers. The role of Joseph becomes interesting in that in several of these works, you see Joseph kind of placed a little bit closer towards the viewer. He's kind of a go-between between the Christ child and the viewer. Sometimes he's placed, he's kind of, he grows a little bit more actively involved in the contemplation of the Christ child. And then the implication is that he helps us as regular human beings to enter into this mystery because he becomes our go-between.
And where does this posture of the two Mary and Joseph kneeling on the other side of the Christ child
Oh,
and adoring,
wonderful,
where does that
wonderful,
originate?
wonderful. This is a very embarrassing story because I don't know how many times I've been to the Vatican museums. I don't think I want to know, but turns out that the oldest version of this image is in the Vatican museums, much to my
Hmm.
incredible shame. I did not figure that out till this year. This is from the vision of Saint Bridget of Sweden, who goes to Bethlehem, and she has a visionary experience in the cave in Bethlehem in which she sees the nativity taking place. In her vision, Mary and Joseph come in. Mary kneels down. Joseph leaves the room, and as Mary is praying, this tremendous light suffuses her, and the Christ child appears on the ground, emanating light. Mary continues to kneel. Joseph comes in and kneels next to her, and the two of them sit in quiet adoration of the child. So that image that you have seen, we've seen a million gazillion times of the
Right.
two kneeling side by side before two kneeling, sorry, not side by side, but kneeling on opposite sides of the Christ child. That is from that the iconography was born from the vision of Saint Bridget and has been basically been used over and over and over again.
Right.
And it turns out the oldest version of it is the oldest version, the one that is the closest to when she first revealed this vision, is in the Vatican museums.